Hey everybody, this is Jeff Newton. I want to talk to you a little bit about Davos, Greenland, and long forgotten Ukraine, because they're tied together. It's connecting the dots here. I'm a former 60 Minutes producer, former senior producer at Vice on HBO, and a former senior producer at National Geographic Television. You guys remember the Davos speech, that rambling long diatribe that Trump had a couple days ago about Greenland, where he said he backed down from the idea that he was going to, if it wasn't given to him or sold to him, he was going to take Greenland by force. He backed down from that at the Davos World Economic Forum, to the relief of all of Europe. He was facing a situation where he would have been attacking another NATO country. Denmark has Greenland as a territory, so by proxy, he would have been attacking a NATO country, and it would have initiated Article 5 of the NATO Charter, which requires all NATO countries to defend against the attacks of anybody else. They come to the aid of each other, putting us in the strangest situation in 75 years. Now, I know the story's a little bit old, but it still has resonance now, and I'll tell you why. So, 75 years of NATO, nobody has really ever had to use the NATO Charter, but on one occasion. Donald Trump made a point the other day at Davos and said he didn't think that if the U.S. was under attack, that Europe would even come to its aid in the first place. He made that point very clearly. But he's forgotten what 9/11 was. 9/11 is when the only time the NATO Charter, Article 5, has been invoked. And dozens of countries came to the aid of the United States in its war on terror, including Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, when we talk about Greenland, we're talking about Donald Trump's desire to have it. He says that has nothing to do with the rare earth minerals that are in Greenland. And there's companies out there that are already working towards trying to get those minerals. And there's, talks about Estee Lauder the Lauder family wanting to get water from Greenland as well. But forget all that. Let's just take Donald Trump at his face value, because he doesn't lie about stuff, right? He said it was about U.S. national security, and predominantly because Russia and China had ships right off of Greenland, and that was dangerous, 2,000 miles away from the United States, very dangerous. Now, he said that Denmark and Greenland can't defend themselves. Well, certainly you have to take into consideration that Denmark is a NATO country, and therefore Greenland is defended as its territory by the NATO Charter. So if Russia or China were to attack Greenland, NATO would be bound under Article 5 to defend Greenland. And that's why probably for hundreds of years, Denmark's been able to, for the most part, take care of Greenland. And for 325 years, in fact, they've been in charge of it. Nothing really bad has happened to it. We had, when NATO was formed 75 years ago, Greenland and Denmark had this role, and they've been fine ever since. Russia's not shown a propensity to go in there. But I tell you what, when he talks about the United States being the only country that is in a position to protect Greenland because we're big and powerful, why don't you ask him why we haven't stepped up under his administration to defend Ukraine? I mean, here is Ukraine with Vladimir Zelensky, a democratically elected president, getting hammered for the last 4 years by Vladimir Putin and the Russian military, and the conscripts that are coming in from places like North Korea and Africa to fight when Russia is losing all of its soldiers. And under the Biden administration, we popped in $66.5 billion to help aid Ukraine. And under the first administration, Donald Trump, what was the number? $1.34 billion. $1.34 billion. It really doesn't seem like he really cares, does he, about Ukraine and democracy and defending NATO. And it is definitely defending NATO, even though Ukraine's not a NATO country. Ukraine would love to be a NATO country, and a lot of Europe would love them to be a NATO country. But the United States doesn't seem to care whether Ukraine gets run over or not by Vladimir Putin, which would put Vladimir Putin right on the edge of Europe. On the edge of Europe. You don't think that's a national security issue for the United States? It's a much further, bigger national security risk than worrying about Russia going into Greenland. They're not going to do it anyways, by the way, because it's a NATO country and they know better. And China knows better as well. They're not going to start punching NATO's buttons in 32 countries defending it all at once. They can't even handle Ukraine. But the United States, if they really wanted to prove that they were the country that is the protector of NATO and the biggest guy on the block, they failed miserably at it under this administration. Instead, Europe has had to figure out ways to continue to provide weapons to Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky's military and funds, because the funds have dried up. In 2025, Zelensky came to the White House and Trump froze the military aid to Ukraine because he said Vladimir Zelensky wasn't doing enough to work towards a peace agreement with Vladimir Putin, who invaded his country. So we failed. Why should NATO trust the United States to protect Greenland in a national defense strategy? It's bullshit. We know it's not about national defense, but even if you want to make that argument, you failed at it in the most consequential way with Ukraine. They're struggling for survival, and he could care less. He's tearing down ballrooms. He's tearing down the East Wing so he can build a ballroom. He's playing golf every weekend. He doesn't care about Ukraine at all. After the Davos summit, the World Economic Summit, and he backed away from that pledge to go into Greenland militarily, and he blinked. He came out and said that there's a working framework now, working with Greenland and Denmark to, a framework so the U.S. government could then, work its way into Greenland and have Greenland in some capacity. He wouldn't talk about what the framework was when asked directly. He said it's complicated and he'll have details later. The leaders of Denmark and Greenland say it's still not for sale, period. It's not for sale. And they were unaware of any framework. The NATO U.S. general, the U.S. commander of NATO Europe, when asked about this framework and the military cooperation that NATO would be having with the United States, in a press conference, he said he was unaware of such a framework. This is the United States general in charge of NATO Europe. Said he was unaware, and that they heard about this alleged plan the same way we all did. He said that. So what that means is that, in a nice way, he's saying the president's lying. There's no framework for what they're asking for, nor should there be. They've not established why the United States should have any say in Greenland, an independent country with its own governance and its own people and its own culture. It does not want to be a part of any of the United States, no more than Canada wants to be the 51st state. Ridiculous. So, when he talks about Denmark not being able to defend against Ukraine, they don't have the ability to do that. I think people should remind him that in the Afghan war, which they had no stake in, they had no towers knocked down, their Pentagon wasn't attacked. They joined when Article 5 was called, and they went to Afghanistan. And Denmark, again, who owns the territorial integrity of Greenland, had more per capita deaths than any other country in the coalition. 7.82% per 7.82 deaths per million people. And U.S. military per million people had 7.50 deaths per million. So obviously they have a larger population here in the United States than they do in Denmark, but they were paying a price too. And they came to the United States' defense under the NATO Charter. So he's wrong about that as well. He'll probably say it again, by the way. He'll probably say it again somewhere, that, you know, these people wouldn't come to the U.S. defense, which is exactly what they did. When 9/11 happened, and they talked to Donald Trump about it, and he wasn't president yet, and they asked him what he thought about 9/11, and he was talking about how he believed now that he had the tallest building in New York. This guy doesn't know what he's doing and doesn't care, has no empathy for anybody or anything. Denmark is not going to fold on this, nor is Europe. And we'll have a discussion about what Europe's planning on doing and how they're going about doing it in our next video. Sometime this weekend, we'll talk about the financial side of the weaponization of the European markets against the U.S. markets. It's very interesting. Remember, I talked a few days ago about how Europe is going to start selling off U.S. interests. Now, even with the deal in Greenland not going anywhere and Trump saying he's not going to invade it, he has soldered all over the field. And Europeans are not going to put up with it anymore. And they're making decisions right now that warn the United States against these ridiculous policies that they have coming out. And they're already starting to sell U.S. assets overseas, selling treasury bonds, pension funds getting out of U.S. treasury bonds. And there's a number of companies that are doing that. And there's talk that Europe will do it in a coordinated fashion to let the Americans know exactly. Just understand that Europe has $8 trillion, more than any region on earth. $8 trillion of U.S. securities and equities. So this thing is just beginning. It's not over because he said he's not going to invade Greenland. He has started a shitstorm, and it's only going to get worse. And he won't even understand it when it's happening. And even if he does, again, he's a narcissist. He won't back down if he thinks he can win something, because that's how they work. Like, follow, and share. Come see us on Substack, where we have free subscriptions and paid subscriptions. The paid subscriptions get you better access to me so that I can answer your questions more directly. And, it helps us build this brand so that we can keep answering questions about how this globe spins around on its axis. Like, follow, and share. And welcome to From the Writer's Cabin, both on Facebook and on Substack and across other social media platforms. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good Friday night.